in the US offers plenty of examples. Black Americans, interned Japanese Americans, Asian Indians who were convicted of sedition in the early 1900s in the US for resisting British colonialism. And this diagnosis has been used to confine the guilty as if they were defiant transgressors of established widespread norms. Now, in using the term strangeness, I want to evoke the connotation of the unfamiliar, perceived as unfriendly, hostile, and ultimately diffident. The OED records the usage of the root strange as first appearing in 1290 to evoke the description of someone who belongs to a place or locality other than one's own. Another usage pertains to persons and signifies the strange as that which is unfriendly, cold, distant, aloof, not affable, not familiar, not encouraging. Moreover, an action is ascribed to the strange person, one who is uncomplying, unwilling to accede to a request or desire. My point in turning to the OED is to illuminate the links between the unfamiliarity of a phenomenon or a group and the way that unfamiliarity is apprehended, rationalized, and internalized by a dominant group or institution in power, and then transformed into a strategy of political management. Embedded in this relationship is another crucial impulse, the transformation of the unfamiliar into a sense of wrongdoing on the part of the strange group itself. In modern parlance, a blaming of the victim, so to speak. Since race as an explicit category for those peoples who appear unfamiliar does not explicitly develop until the 18th century, strangeness might be the most apt term to describe a phenomenon that can be found in writings as early as those of Pliny the Elder, who's writing in 23 to 79 ACE, in his Natural History, which discusses a range of monstrous races. He offers descriptions of the Paniotii, who are the elephant-eared people, who have these long ears that they curl up to sleep in, the Kynocephali, the dog-headed people, and other unfamiliar peoples. Depictions of monstrous races can be found in medieval maps, referred to as Noachic or TO maps, dating back to 600 ACE, which locate Jerusalem in the center of the world. The depiction of Jerusalem in the center also points, perhaps too obviously, to the co-development of the languages of monstrosity and rationality within the context of Christianity. The races in question stood out because of their abnormality of appearance, because they were gruesome, or otherwise conspicuously marked as different. Thus, the need to explain the unfamiliar emerges and is transformed into a narrative about another's inferiority, savageness, and not quite humanness. The category of race, which has become such a familiar one today, might be successfully explained as operating on a similar principle. The writings of Buffon, Leclerc, Herder, Kant, Hegel, and others in the 18th and 19th centuries focus on the development of races of peoples in other parts of the world. These theories take their lead from the observations and reports of anthropologists and explorers who are traveling to the Americas and Africa and the South Pacific, happening upon strange peoples, peoples whose customs, languages, features, cultures are not only unfamiliar, but perhaps translated as cold, distant, uncompliant, unfriendly, or any one of the other terms that are offered as definitions of that which is strange. Strangeness is not identical to foreignness, although there is clearly much overlap between the two. Foreignness is also a language by which populations are alienated and recognized as alien to a society. In the 21st century, foreignness is almost exclusively devoted to the immigrant question, similar to the way that the term pertained to the Jewish question in Europe or the Japanese question in North America during the beginning of the 20th century. In each of these instances, the term foreignness is used to identify, focus on it, and expose to suspicion the trait that a group is from outside the national context. This is but one facet of the hostility that is visited upon these groups. The term falsely closes the door to other traits and other more nebulous factors that raise fear and suspicion within a domestic context. In this sense, strangeness is more apt when used as a term to consider the grounds by which a group begins its process of being racialized within a larger society at home. The notion of strangeness implies a certain primordial fear, which for centuries has appeared to require that certain house cleaning strategies must be employed to eliminate or manage the strangeness. The actions, the rationale of a stranger or a strange group cannot be predicted. The appearance of a stranger in one's midst often disrupts the everyday harmony of a society. The unfamiliar practices of a new group appear to threaten the order of an already ongoing set of customs and culture. Moreover, the strange group cannot automatically be counted on. Are its commitments, scruples, sense of loyalty the same as ours? Will this group turn on us in a time of crisis? The strangeness of another group is often immediately linked to the potential danger that it appears to pose to that group. That's what I mean by the unruly. So at which point does the strangeness of a group become perceived as the unruly? Let me suggest that it's not the unfamiliarity of the group that's perceived as unfriendly or dangerous. Rather, it's the perceived unwillingness to adapt, pay deference, consciously or explicitly self-deprecate or assimilate to the norms of the larger population. Often what makes a group strange, I apologize for repeating this so often, the term, is often too nebulous or too fecund to pinpoint. And certain practices become the stand-in. Certain singular practices become the stand-in for the more general strangeness of a group. And I think you all have had plenty of this in your midst over the last few months, what with the hijab being the kind of center of this kind of discussion. These become fetishized as the core representation of that group's singularity, and their continual practice, read as the absence of conformity, adaptation, or assimilation of a group's practices within a larger society, is what is viewed as unruly. The absence of conformity or adaptation appears to imply an unwillingness to conform, or a refusal to see right reason. That is, that the practices of the dominant group are better or correct, or at the very least, the definitive status quo towards which a new group has an obligation to assimilate. This perceived unwillingness or some other striking feature of a group, a feature that cannot be obscured, becomes the source of the perception that an unruly threat is being posed to the larger society. And so the unruly signifies the threatening aspect of the strange. It is threatening because it will not melt away into some comfortable, familiar configuration, but continues to be conspicuous, like a protruding excrescence. There are numerous ways that we might see the emergence of an unruly feature in a certain context. In earlier eras, the category of race, or monstrosity, or the abnormal, or ultimately madness enabled the possibility of confining, conquering, colonizing, and civilizing the unruly. In the contemporary era, another way that the unruly is noted is through the discourse of cultural difference. But since the mid-20th century, refined Western liberal society has learned to manage its fear of the strange by controlling the degree and quality of cultural difference that will be tolerated and accommodated or refused outright. Liberalism as a political project prides itself on the ability to tolerate a range of political perspectives, personal viewpoints, varieties of culture. And yet, nonconformity, understood as a strange practice or marked cultural difference that will not fade, strikes a disruptive blow even within this framework. It suggests something askew, a distance or separation even beyond the standard unique perspective. Nonconformity indicates a self-conscious distance from the group, one which suggests an affront, even if neither self-conscious decisions nor deliberate affronts are necessarily in evidence. But nonconformity is another way of articulating an avowed stance of difference. In a world which since the end of the Second World War has espoused a tolerance of multiculturalism, banal cultural differences such as exotic holidays, traditions, or food are insufficient to marginalize a population, since they can be construed as or transformed into simple consumer or aesthetic preferences, and in a world marked by global capitalism, welcomed as marks of cosmopolitanism. By contrast, significant cultural differences are understood as profound and defiant practices that extend far beyond capitalism, searing the very heart of an apparent primordial political and cultural homogeneity. In the complicated contemporary Western and political landscape, significant cultural difference has become another way to understand a population as dangerous and as belonging to a different logic, or an altogether illogic. And illogical, incomprehensible populations are nearly always perceived as threatening. One of the urgent concerns of the post-Reformation secularized Christian liberal world is the perceived danger of a cultural heterogeneity that departs radically from or challenges a prevailing political cultural order. This turmoil is characterized by